Hi everyone, my name is Carl and welcome to the tutorial for my Procedural Walls pack. In this video I'll be going over all the different features and I will show you how to get the most out of the pack. So when you add the pack to your project, you'll see a Procedural Walls folder that gets added into your content folder. You can click on that, click on Blueprints, and there you'll find BP Spline Wall. And this is where all the magic happens, so you can just drag that into your world. To start with, I just made an empty landscape. I just went to the landscape tab and created a new landscape. Okay, so let's look at this wall that is included here. So to build your wall, you'll see when you click on it, you'll see these spline points. If you click on a spline point, you can drag the spline point and move the wall wherever you want. And the textures will automatically adjust so that nothing gets stretched, as you can see. Now, if you hold down Alt and drag, it'll create a new spline point. Hold down Alt again and drag. Hold down Alt again. And so you can see you can quickly build a wall in any shape or form that you need. To adjust the height of the wall, it's very easy. Just select the wall, go to Scale in your Transform settings, and just adjust the Z scale. Just make sure that this little lock is unchecked. So let's say we want to make it 4 meters high. We can just enter 4, hit enter. There we go. Now you've got a wall that is 4 meters high. Okay, now a cool thing about this is I've included a snap function. And what that does is, let's say you're building a wall across uneven terrain. Let's add some bumps and dips. So now you can see your wall is hanging in the air, and if you click on it and click the snap function, it'll automatically find the ground and snap to the ground. So that allows you to easily build a wall without having to worry about moving each part up or down and rotating it to fit your landscape. If you've got extreme landscape, you may find that sometimes the bottom of the walls or the bottom of the pillars actually come out of the ground. And for that, we've got a little function here. It's called Wall Z Offset. So you can just make that, let's say, -20. And this is in centimeters. Everything is commented out, so you'll see it there. And now your wall no longer sticks out of the floor there. Cool. The default way these walls are built, they'll just follow the contour of the terrain. Another cool function is you can make the tangents sharp. They're currently sharp. You can see you've got nice corners to your wall. If you click on Make Tangents Round, it'll give you a more rounded type of wall. More in the style of the old school Wall of China type walls that bend around terrain and so on. Cool. So let us make that sharp again. And you'll notice that in the real world, walls don't actually slope like this. This is not the best way to build walls. So what they would do is, if the landscape drops, they would dig out the landscape and make the walls step down in little steps. That is also possible to do if you click this box that says always make walls level. Now your walls behave more like in the real world. And this works really well for smaller slopes and stuff like that. Another thing, you can also right click anywhere on your spline and say add a spline point, and it'll add a spline point for you. And if snap is enabled, you'll see it snaps as you move it. If you want to adjust individual pillars, just make sure it disables snap. Select that spline point. If you want to make this point move down a bit, you can just move it down to fine-tune the placement of your walls. So let's add another spline point there. Move that over there. Now, sometimes when you start working with complicated long walls, let's say making a long maze and you've got a lot of spline points. It may get a bit slow if you start moving the spline points around. Or if you want to select the whole wall as a whole and move that, you may see it gets a bit hard to work like that. So I've included a little checkbox that says don't draw walls. If you check that, it won't draw the walls, only the spline. You can easily move that around, make your adjustments to the shape. And then when you're happy, you can just uncheck that again. And it'll build your walls where your spline is. Cool. You'll see there's a checkbox here that says ignore other walls when snapping. So let's say we have another wall here. Let's enable snapping. Now if you move this to a certain point, it'll snap onto that wall. And that's not always what you want, as you can see. So we can just say ignore other walls when snapping. And now it won't snap onto walls. Also, if you have geometry in your level, let's say we've got this little box here. Now you can make your walls snap to this if you want. So let's just disable and enable snapping again. Now you can see my wall snaps to the box and it builds it over the box. But if you want the wall to ignore certain objects in the world, let's say I want this to ignore that little wall there, so we just click ignore other walls. And if you want to exclude this box from being checked when the snapping happens, what you can do is there's a snapping custom ignore list. You can add an element there just by clicking on the plus, select the dropper, and just select the object that you want to exclude from the snap check. Now you can see your wall does not snap to that object anymore. If you want to remove this, you can just select delete and it'll snap it to the object again. So that's just useful when you want your walls to go over or through, let's say, piles of dirt or something that you add to your terrain. Cool. So let's get to the settings of the walls that you can adjust. Let's get rid of this one. It'll just ask this because this wall is referenced by the ignore all other walls in the other thing, in the other wall blueprint. So you can just say yes. There we go. Won't influence anything. Won't cause you any trouble. So let's click on this. Okay. Now for all the walls, for all the materials that are included, or most of them at least, I've added some parallax occlusion that you can enable or disable. Now, for those of you that don't know, parallax occlusion adds extra depth to your textures. As you can see, these bricks almost look as though they stand out from the texture. If we disable parallax occlusion mapping, you'll see now you have a flat texture, and you enable it again, you've got a nice little bit of extra depth to it. This is nice when you are going to see the textures up close, as we are seeing them here, as you get that extra little depth. But if you are only going to see the walls from, let's say, a distance of like this, if you disable it now, then you don't see any difference. And you can save some performance by disabling the use occlusion mapping. So let's enable that for now. It's not a huge performance knock, but you can test it out in your own projects. We'll get to the vertex painting part just now. You'll also see there's a leave ends open little checkbox. All that does is, let's say at the end of your wall, you've got this little closed off part. If you enable that, it'll leave it open. Add the wall top. It just adds this top to the walls. It's nice for some of the textures that are included, like the bricks. It gives you a nice natural type looking finish to your wall top. So you can enable or disable that if you want. Wall top variation gives you either the thin one, the thicker one, or one that is a bit more like a sloped type look. Okay, now wall type, regular. We've got regular, thin, and thick. Again, these are useful for using it with different types of textures. So if we go to thin, and we disable the wall top, Now you just got like basically a plain almost wall. And this is useful for the chain link settings and stuff like that. I'll get to that a bit later on in the video. Thick just makes the wall a bit thicker, as you can imagine. Whoops, there we go. Cool. We've got a bit of a thicker wall if that is the look you are going for. And the wall tops will adjust to suit the thicker look as well. There we go. So let's make that regular again. Let's make the top one. There we go. Okay, now wall look. This is where all the variation of the look comes in. I have a few nice textures pre-made that is included in the pack, and they are all linked in this little drop down. So you see we've got red bricks, painted bricks. Now with anything that has a painted surface, you'll see there's a wall paint color where you can adjust the color of the paint. So if you want to make it like a dirtier red brownish color, you can do that. We've got a nice painted wall. So let's look at the age wall. This adjusts the age of the wall. So let's make that 1. And for this specific texture, you'll see the paint starts chipping off. You can start seeing the bricks through the paint finish. And you'll see the bricks aren't affected by the paint color. But if we were to adjust the tint, now you can see everything except for the paint gets adjusted again. Okay, so underneath this, you'll see a add moss wall. And moss is applied to a lot of these textures. Let's look at this. We've got red bricks, painted, plastered, stone blocks, stones, chain link. All of these gets moss when you add the checkbox. Most of the sci-fi ones except for the force field. And organic and hedge does not receive moss with the checkbox. So let's select the red bricks again. Let's look at some of the other ones. Let's select stone blocks. There we go. You've got a nice stone blocks texture. You can also adjust the age. Make it 0, make it 1. Some of them you can overdrive the texture or the age of the wall, and you get these nice exaggerated effects. Let's just make that 1 for now. Now, if we add moss, you'll see moss gets added to the wall, obviously. So this is added in, this is basically a texture that is already baked. The moss is already baked into the texture, and it just switches it out for that one. If we make it new, you can also have moss, and you can start seeing the moss in between the low points of the texture. We take the moss away, add the moss back in, make it older. There we go. Now for all these textures, you can use Vertex painting to paint the age and the texture on the wall as well. What this is good for is when you stand back, let's select a repeating texture like this. Now let's say we add moss and we make it old. You can see if you look closely or if you look carefully, you can see the texture being tiled. And it's not so obvious on this one, but it's something that you just don't want. And for that reason, I've included the ability to vertex paint the age in the moss as well. So what we can do is turn the age down to 0 again, and then we enable use vertex paint age and just moss for the walls. So we enable that, then we go to your vertex paint or your paint tab. On vertex color painting, you can now paint the different settings onto the wall. And in my case, the red controls your age, green controls the amount of moss on the wall, and blue is just a general darkening of the wall. So if we do blue, we can keep this little color picker open. And then as we darken this and we start painting, you can see you can darken certain spots of the wall without affecting the rest of the wall. So this will give you some nice variation already. So let's just Return that to normal. You can also just click remove and remove everything. Okay, so now if we use the red channel, as I said, paints age. And the darker color you're painting, the older it gets. So let's paint it like that. And we can just start painting it. Let's make some really old parts around the bottom here. You can make it a bit smaller if you want. Give you some more control. Let's paint some age around the corners like this. And this one maybe have it go up there. And then because we have add moss to the wall checked, you'll see it adds moss everywhere, but in the older parts, it'll get more moss. So if we disable that, you just have the wall looking a bit older in the parts that we have painted, as you can see. And now you can see we don't have that problem with the tiling anymore. So let's add the moss because I quite like that look. Add some there. Cool. And if we want to add even more moss on top of the current layer, we can select the green. And then also the darker the value is, the more moss you will add. So if you just want to add a little bit, you can just start painting, darken a bit more, painting. And as you can see, the moss is also height lerped in. So what that means is it'll get added to the lower parts first. So if there's cracks or little crevices, it'll get added to those first. And as we darken it a bit more, you'll see it starts coming out of the cracks, the crevices, and starts filling up more of the space. So we can do that. And it often helps to just blend it. So just make it a bit lighter. Go around the corners, a bit lighter still. So that you don't have abrupt cutoffs. And as you can see now, you can paint both sides separately. So I can go in and paint this side full on moss, basically. And it won't affect the other side. That obviously gives you some freedom, but it also takes a bit longer to paint both sides separately. What you can do is, let's just remove this quickly. Paint that with white. All the moss goes away. So if you want to paint the next part, you can, there's a setting here that says ignore back facing. If you disable that, so let's say we paint some moss on here now, in the middle there, let's find the sweet spot. There we go. Now if you go to the back, you'll see the back is also painted. So if you want to paint both sides of your wall at the same time, just make sure to disable ignore back facing. Cool. And this works for all the different textures as well. So let's remove all the painting. Let's select the stone blocks, let's say. And on the green channel, we can paint some moss and you'll see it starts coming out of the cracks there. Now it starts covering the tops of the stones as well. And if we select the red channel, we can paint certain parts, make certain parts a bit older. Add some cracks. This is especially useful as well. Let's remove this for the plastered setting. Go. Okay. For the plaster, you'll see it's a nice plaster type look. As it gets older, you'll see the plaster chipping off in the stones, the bricks starting to show through. Now with these, it's unfortunately impossible to avoid the tiling effect that you get. That's where the Vertex painting is really useful. So let's put the age back to 0 and then find some cracks. We can just paint some cracks here and there in certain spots. Like this. And now, as you can see, you don't have a problem with tiling of textures anymore. We can also add some moss to this. Let's go a bit closer. As you can see, it starts getting added to the deeper parts first. And it kind of dirties up the rest of the texture as well. There we go. And you can obviously adjust the color of the wall to anything you want. And as long as you use the paint setting, it won't adjust the tint of the bricks or anything underneath the moss or anything like that. Cool. Okay, next setting, wall glow color. Ooh, cool. Some of these textures have emissive parts to them. Those are mainly the sci-fi ones. So let's say we select sci-fi 1. Just reset all of this. Remove the vertex painting. Select sci-fi 1. Remove the wall top. We don't need that just now. These pillars, you can also remove the pillars. We'll get to that just now. Okay, cool. So as you can see, these parts, this hexagon part is actually a emissive glowing part. And you can adjust the color of that with this setting here. So let's make it like a nice bright green. Okay. So you can see it's glowing green. And with the glow brightness walls setting, you can adjust the brightness. Let's make it like 100. Now it starts glowing. And this glow will also be included in the global illumination when you build the lighting. So you'll see a green glow around the actual emissive parts of the wall, which is really cool for making darker interiors where you want the walls to cast light color into the scene as well. Cool. Desaturate amount for the walls comes in handy if you, let's say we've got the hedge and you don't want it to be as green as this. You can turn up the desaturation a little bit. Let's say 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. As you can see, it desaturates the colors of the texture. And that works well when you want to tint the texture as well. So let's say we put that back to 0. If you adjust the tint to a reddish color, you'll see the green kind of interferes with the red and you get all these weird yellows and stuff. But if you desaturate that a bit, you'll get a more even red tint to your wall. So let's turn that back, turn that back. This is only for very specific uses. Okay. Let us select the stone blocks again. Let's say you want to make these, adjust the shininess of the wall. As you can see, it's got a bit of a shine to it like normal rocks. But if you want it to look more wet or sealed with some lacquer type substance, you can always adjust the roughness multiplier for the walls. Let's just line it up like this. And if you want to make it more shiny, you can turn down the roughness. So let's make it 0.5 so it's not as rough. And you can see it gets more shiny. 0.2. Now it almost looks wet, if that is the look you're going for. And if you want to make it more rough or rougher, whatever the correct term is, you can just turn it up. So at 1, it looked like that. And if you don't want it to be shiny at all, you can just turn this up to 5. And this is especially useful for some of the other textures like the sci-fi texture like this one. Now the tiles are matte. If you turn it to 1, everything gets more shiny. If you turn it to 0.2, it gets even more shiny. And now these tiles start to give you like a nice reflective surface as well. And the metal background to this also gets more shiny. So let's just turn that back to 1. You get the default look. Another thing, this specific texture as well, you can see these panels are painted panels and the back is metal. So if we adjust the paint color, you can make that any color without affecting the metal background to the texture as well. Let's make that nice green. There we go. Cool. And all of these, like I said, you can adjust the age. Like for these, they start breaking down. And some of them, only when they get older and start breaking down, you can see the insides of them. And with the insides kind of glowing out and shining through the exterior of the wall like this. So let's just turn this back to normal. As you can see there, it gets all rusty and broken, and the interior workings start glowing through. If you don't want them to glow through, you can just turn the brightness to 0. Cool. Now the normal map strength, this adjusts the strength of the normal map, as you could have guessed probably. To illustrate this, let's just select the bricks again. Now if you turn the normal map strength down to 0, you'll see you get a much more flat type of look. And if that is the type of look you're going for in your certain project, that is useful to be able to do this. You can also turn off the parallax occlusion, and that'll make it even flatter. So now you can see you can just have a flat texture, basically. So we can turn that up again, normal map to 1, and you can turn that up to 2 maybe. Get some more of the finer details if you want. Makes it look a bit more gritty. I think we overdid it a bit. Just turn that back to 1. If it's on 0, you get the flat texture, basically. So let's just turn that back to 1. There we go. Got the normal one. Use parallax occlusion mapping and turn off the vertex paint. We're not going to use that just now. Okay, now tiling texture X, tiling texture Y, texture offset. This affects how the texture is applied to your walls. If you want to adjust the size of the textures, you can just adjust the 2 tiling settings. If we make it smaller than 1, the textures will get bigger. So let's say we make it 0.5 and 0.5. Now you've got bigger bricks on your walls if you want. And that's also quite cool, especially useful for the, let's say, the sci-fi tiles. You can make this 2 and 2. That actually looks quite cool as well. If you want to change the shape. Like the bricks, you'll see get stretched, but these ones, they don't have a natural shape to them. So you are welcome to adjust the tiling separately and not keep it uniform. For now, let's do this. Just do it like that. Let's turn that to 5 and 5. And as you can see, you get a totally different type of look to your wall, which is quite handy. Okay, now the offset, you can adjust the offset, how the texture is placed on the wall. That is useful for some of the textures that don't uniformly tile in all directions, like Sci-Fi Wall 1. You've got this strip in the middle. And if you want that strip to be lower or higher, you can adjust the offset Y. If you want it to be up top there, or maybe you want it at the bottom, you'll see that the texture loops, the placement loops from 0 to 1. So if you go from 0 and you get to 1, it'll be in the same place again. So if we put it on 1, it'll be there. If you put it on 0.6, 0.7, there we go. Now it's near the floor. And let's say we want it to shine a bit more again. For some of these sci-fi ones, you'll see they are a normal sci-fi and then a detailed texture as well. The detailed ones just have some extra things added to them. So for these, we've got a little symbol that goes there. And that'll obviously get a bit too much when you apply it to the whole wall. But what I like to do for this is set the normal wall to, let's say, Sci-Fi 1. And then create another wall. And then make that Sci-Fi 1 detail. And let's make that the Y offset 0.5. So you get that in the middle. And this one we can make 0. And then Alt drag off of the whole object. And we can turn that back to normal. Now we can just carry on building our wall. And then wherever we want to add a little detail, we can add one of these panels. if we want. So now we get to the custom wall material and the custom wall mesh, where you can add your own textures and your own meshes that you make into the walls very easily. So let's say we want to apply a different mesh to this, a different texture to this wall. We can use the starter content that comes with Unreal Engine. If you create a new project and you choose to add starter content, I'm just going to use this now because it has a bunch of other materials in it as well. Okay, so let's say we like these clay bricks. We can just click on them and then click on this little arrow, custom wall material, and it adds it to the wall. Now you'll see the texture gets stretched, and that's because the custom material doesn't have the same scalar parameters that allows us to adjust the tiling of the textures on the walls. But that's very easy to fix. You can just open the texture. So what we can do is go to our procedural walls, materials, scroll down to our master texture. You'll see it says M-Wall Master Flat and M-Wall Master Parallax. You can go into either of these. Let's go into this one. And where the texture coordinates are set, you'll see we've got these bunch of settings. So you can just select all of that, right click, say copy, then go into your custom material that you want to use for the walls and find its texture coordinates. It'll usually just be a texture coordinate box like this. So you can just paste that, Control V, and then plug that into there. So we hold down Control, drag that there, hit apply. And now as soon as that applies, it should apply. There we go. So then that way you can add any custom material to your wall. Let's just add that. There we go. So, and now because we pasted these settings, that includes the scalar parameters and everything that I used for the other textures, you can also adjust the texture settings over here. So if you want smaller bricks for this in example, you can change that to 2, change that to 2. You've got smaller bricks. And that way you can add any tileable texture that you have to the walls very easily. And if you want to take it off again, just click there. There we go. Let's make that 0.5 again, 0.55. Whatever you want. If you want to move that a bit to the side as well, you can go 1.9, 0.9, 0.85, 0.95. There we go. Now it's nicely centered. Cool. And then custom wall mesh. That is useful if you want other shapes of walls, basically. So for the example, I've made a little tunnel that you can easily apply to the system. So for this, let us leave it at that default scale and everything. Let us remove the pillars. In the pillar settings, you'll see most of the same settings. You've got all the tiling, the desaturation, roughness, normal, glow brightness, the paint colors, the glow color, the age, the moss. The only different things that are here, you can adjust the thickness of the pillars, make it thicker, and adjust the top size of the pillars. Turn that back. And then you can have a square or a round pillar and a square or a round top. And then also add it. You can select to add a top to the pillar or not, depending on whether you want it. So let's just turn all of that back. And you can also use parallax occlusion for the pillars, use vertex painting for the pillars in the same way that we painted the age and the moss onto the walls. And then you can select to add pillars at spline points. That is ticked by default. So in spline points, the pillars will get added automatically like that. if you uncheck that, you won't have pillars at the spline points. That works nicely, especially if you make your walls round. Round. There we go. So now you've got a nice curvy wall without having pillars everywhere. Just add pillars back there. And then you can choose to add a pillar at the end as well, which is useful when you have a wall that ends somewhere. So you can add that. If you don't want any pillars, you can just uncheck these 3 boxes. And especially for custom meshes and stuff like that, you oftentimes don't want any pillars. So let's say we disable the pillars. Let's disable the wall top here, because we don't want that wall top added to our custom wall. Add wall top. Okay, now in the demo folder, in the procedural walls folder, you will find a meshes folder, and in that I've got a little tunnel mesh here. So if we select the spline wall blueprint, go to wall settings and go to custom wall mesh, and you click on the wall, your custom wall mesh, and then click the arrow. It adds a nice little custom wall that you can also adjust in any way that you want. These ones are a bit close. Another handy thing is, as you build it out like this, oftentimes the walls get kind of squished in and bent like that. If you want to make it nice and round again, just go back to your general settings and click on make tangents round. It makes it much more round and nice. Cool. So that's an easy way to create a nice little tunnel, or use any wall mesh that you want. The default wall mesh is 4 meters wide and 1 meter tall. So if you make your walls like that, then it'll automatically be able to scale up with the height and have everything work correctly. Or else you can just make your wall a specific size that you want it to be, and then just make sure that you leave the scale settings, everything at 1. Because if you make this 2 now, you'll see it gets scaled up like that. Which is fine as well if you want it like that. Cool. So let's make that 1 again. Okay, and for the pillars, let's just go over that quickly. For the pillars, everything is the same as we saw. You can adjust everything in the same way as you adjust the walls. Let's go to this wall that we made here. We can select all of them and then go to the pillar settings and make the pillar look sci-fi 3. Nice. That just fits a bit better. And we can say, don't add the pillar top. And that's especially useful when making corridors and stuff like that. If you have a roof to your walls and you want to make some corridors like this. So you can have some nice corridors, and you don't need these pillar tops to the walls. Let's just delete that again quickly. Okay, add pillar tops, sizes, we discussed. Yeah, everything else is the same. Okay, you can also add custom pillar meshes and custom pillar tops to your walls and pillars. So if you want to add a custom pillar material, we can again, let's go into our starter content, materials, and that's the one we already fixed with our little texture coordinate system. Select that, add that there, and then you've got nice pillars using your own custom textures. Let's take that out. Okay, and then in the same way you can add any custom pillar meshes as well. So if we go to meshes, this is a little pillar mesh that I made for the tunnel as well. So if we select the pillar there, just select this to set that to add pillars, at the end and at the spline points and at the start. And then for our custom pillar mesh, we select that, click there. Cool, now I've added those rings at the ends. So let's make those solid metal. Nice, make it a bit older. There we go. Cool, I think everything's just still loading. There we go. Okay, so now we've got these little pillar tops floating around, so we can just disable add pillar top, and you don't have that anymore. So now you can add some supports to your tunnels in this way. And this is just a very simple tunnel mesh that I made in Blender quickly, just to illustrate the abilities of the pack. Okay, and you can even add some custom pillar tops as well. So if you want custom pillar tops added to your meshes like these, let's say add pillar tops, add pillar tops. I don't know what's going to happen if I add this. Okay, it uses that as a top now. Doesn't really work because it has a hole in the middle. But the pillar tops, you can, for reference, just go into Procedural Walls, Meshes, and you'll see the pillar tops here. They're just basically little blocks that lie on the floor. So you can add any custom ones that you make to your pillars as well. Oh yeah, one last thing I wanted to show you. For some of these textures like the sci-fi force field, it's a good idea to use the thin wall setting for them, as the thick wall setting kind of gives you a weird little offset looking thing there. So if we select the wall and go to wall type, set that to thin, then it's basically just a single layer and it's much more natural looking. And for the for this specific force field look, you can also adjust the color, obviously. So we want to make it green and make it more shiny, 200. And also another thing where the thin setting works really well is for the chain link. So now I've got a nice chain link. If you want these pillars to be like typical chain link type pillars, you can go and make the chain or the pillar type round, solid metal. Let's make it a bit older, 0.5, there we go. And then just make it thinner. So the pillar thickness, we can make maybe 0.3. And then the top size, just make that 0.3 as well. Let's make it older even. There we go. There you go. We can maybe make it even a bit thinner. 0.2. 0.2. Ah, that's better. Now you've got a nice chain link fence going on. And you can also adjust the age of the chain link and everything. If you've got the wall selected and you want to get a bit of a better look at what's going on, you can just hit G and it'll take away those selection lines, but still let you edit the settings. So let's make the wall older. Now chain link gets older and newer again. And you can even add moss to this. And you'll see little bits of moss gets added to your wall in certain places. Now you've got an old wall that's all mossy. Cool, that's it for my Spline Walls pack. Like I said, it's available on the Unreal Engine Marketplace. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me, send me an email or ask me in the comments below, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much and have an awesome day.